Oh, good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all. Um, so yes, and thank you to Eva again for letting us use her platform here. And we're looking forward now to digging into Daniel and possibly Revelation with Alex. Thank you again, Alex. And so yes, let's get started. Will we get started with a prayer? Yeah. So who would like to pray? Alex?
I can definitely pray.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this Sabbath evening, for us Europeans at least. We ask that you join this study, that you enlighten me with your Holy Spirit so that I can be a useful vessel for thee, and we ask that you enlighten us in regards to the truths that are found in your prophecies, in your word, more specifically in Daniel chapter 7. We ask that you help us understand the practical use of understanding these prophecies in our lives, and that you may help us to forward this light that you now will give us to other people. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Okay, I am going to share my window. How is this?
Yes, good.
And what happens if I change my tab? Can you see that I'm doing that, or can you still only see the PowerPoint?
Just the PowerPoint.
Just the PowerPoint, yeah.
Right. So I can cheat. I can actually read stuff and just pretend that I know things. So today we'll have a bit different study than the last time. It's going to be less theoretical, and we're going to have way more. We're going to see how these different hermeneutics from the last study, how they come into play in Daniel chapter 7, and at the very end of the study, we will see how that relates to Revelation. But before we start the very sequential deconstruction of Daniel 7, I would like to, for those who don't know, I hope really that there are some people in this meeting that actually have no idea about what Daniel's all about. So I hope, because a lot of the things that we will cover tonight will be very beginner friendly, and just like very, what are the four B's? How do we know what it means, and so on. But before we get into it, I want to explain why, uh, what's the core purpose of studying Daniel in general. What is the meaning of the book of Daniel? Because a lot of people, they actually, even very versed theologians in the book of Daniel, they fail to understand the purpose of the book of Daniel. So the red thread in the book of Daniel is the transference of dominion. It's um, it's the passing on of the scepter of power between different kings, different emperors, different empires. And this is a key thing to understand, that the book of Daniel is really all about understanding how dominion is passed from generation to generation. And the reason this is important is because, in the grand scheme of things, if we zoom all the way out, and I mean all the way, as much as you can, and you think about the purpose of life and the purpose of us being here on earth, the best way to describe the meaning of our lives is really to understand that Earth was created for a purpose, a very specific purpose, which is uh, to be a part of the we are basically witnesses before the rest of the universe because Satan has accused God of being a tyrant, and he has accused Christ of several things. And this is a different study in of itself. But it's important to introduce the book of Daniel in this context because once you understand um, that Adam was actually given dominion over this earth, and he was supposed to be a representative of our entire world in the heavenly council of representatives of the different worlds. Um, when this dominion was forfeited by subjugating onto the serpent in the Garden of Eden, this dominion was lost and was given over to Satan, the serpent, the devil. And ever since then, what Satan has done, he has had representatives who would enforce his will in the world. Uh, and this might sound quite, well, surreal or maybe even far-fetched. But just as God has prophets and kings who are doing His will, like David or Solomon, Satan has these chosen servants as well, and one would be surprised how organized their hierarchy is. And the Book of Daniel is really a study of that. So, and I just want to quickly tell you about this that some of them are actually quite on the nose about this fact. Pope John the 23rd, he had this prayer in the 60s where he said, "The mark of Cain is stamped upon our foreheads. Across the centuries, our brother Abel has lain in blood, which we drew, and shed tears we caused by forgetting thy love." So, and this symbol, this sign of Marduk, which is really the mythology of Cain, where Cain slew his brother, as we know. Cain is the son of Adam and Eve, so was Abel, and he slew his brother. And there are different hypotheses for why he slew his brother. The Bible says that it had something to do with a sacrifice unto the Lord. They were to sacrifice on the altar for the Lord, and they had different ideas about how that's done. But just like in part one, where we studied the hermeneutics of typology, type, antitype, and all of that, all of the whole story of Cain is really to teach us from the beginning of the Bible that you really only have two classes of people in this world. You have those who are the children of disobedience, the humans who participate in the rebellion that Satan started in heaven, and now he continues that rebellion on earth, where he's the accuser of brethren, like it says in the New Testament. Um, and you can partake in this rebellion, and he will often use certain methods and techniques to convince you of participating in this rebellion. And then you have the other class of people, the children of Seth, the the obedient children of God. And so what I'm trying to say is that when you study prophecy, especially Daniel and Revelation, very condensed prophecy in those two books, what you want to do is you actually train your mind to think about this concept, these two classes of people, that you have the children of disobedience and rebellion, those who, and the leaders of this rebellion, they have been marked with the mark of Cain or the sign of Anu, and they have been given authority to punish the other children of disobedience. And God will often give his disobedient children unto the children of Cain. We often see that, and this is actually how this is actually the story of this is the story of Daniel in general. They were given over to captivity in Babylon. Babylon is a Middle Eastern country that doesn't exist anymore. It's in the Iraq region. But so it's very important when you study the Bible, think about these two classes of people, because the Bible, the prophecy especially, will actually concern itself with the children of God, and then the leaders of the rebellion that Satan is leading, and the war between those two factions. And once you understand this principle, it's actually much easier to understand prophecy, because then you've always anchored it on the red thread that goes through the book of Daniel. So if there is a symbol, or if there is a segment of a certain prophecy that you think that you find very confusing, just think about this, and you will actually, it will help you to in your studies. So so as I said earlier, we're going to look at Daniel 7, which is a rep. It's a vision that that Daniel had, the prophet Daniel, when he was in captivity in Babylon, and he is shown that um, there will be four great empires throughout humanity, and after those four great empires, uh, the everlasting kingdom, or the dominion that was lost, that Adam lost and was given over to Satan, so that he became the god of this world. Uh, the second Adam is going to get that dominion back, um, and we're told this will happen over the span of four empires that will last from the time of Daniel and until the end of the world. So it reveals the entire history of the world and God's plan for his people. Um, and the whole chapter is wrapped in symbols, and so is Daniel 2 with the statue and metal, with the different kinds of metals, um, as you can see here on this picture. But basically, the different parts of the statue from Daniel 2 correspond to the different animal or the different beasts that come out of the sea in chapter 7. They're the different empires. Um, and the reason why these beasts come out of the sea is because the sea is a symbol of nations, of multitudes, of peoples. And we know this by studying different parts of the chapter. And this specific detail is revealed in Revelation chapter 17, that the seas are a symbol for nations. And the reason why these empires are symbolized by ferocious beasts is because, just think back thousands of years ago. The last thing you want to see is to meet a lion, or a leopard with four heads, or a ferocious bear with bloody ribs in its mouth. So it's really just a very it's a very vivid picture, or imagery of something that's persecuting God's children. And that's why I keep emphasizing this point, that it's all about God's children and the hired human agents that now work for Satan and his rebellion. Yes. So I'm gonna have a couple of verses, but it's not gonna be like we're not gonna read, the entire chapter. It's just gonna be a bit too heavy, I think, for today. But we'll have some verses. So I'm just gonna read this. And four great beasts came out of the sea, diverse one from another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So, first off, we need to apply one of the hermeneutics we learned uh, last Friday, which is that we can see that this the reason why we know this is symbolic, the reason why we know that these beasts are symbols for something, is because we cannot just interpret it literally and make it make sense. It violates the natural law. Like it doesn't make sense, like biologically, physically, because there are no lions with wings, and lions don't turn to men that suddenly stand upon their feet. And we are told later in the chapter anyway that these beasts represents kingdoms. And a winged lion, by the way, or a lamassu, was a common decorative motif in Babylon, and it has been identified by many archaeologists to mean Babylon, to be the actual Babylonian Empire. If you go to the Museum of Berlin and you see the Gate of Babylon, the blue gates of Babylon that are still preserved, you will actually see that you have these winged lions everywhere. So you have that whole region that you see in purple is the old Babylonian Empire. And I'm not gonna go into like the different battles that they had and when did the how Cyrus conquered the city and all of those beautiful, like very interesting details. That's really outside the scope of this study. The point of this study will be a more bird eye view perspective of why it is that we even need to understand how the scepter of power goes from the different kings, and why does that concern us in the end times. The second beast, the bear with the ribs in their mouth, symbolizes Medo-Persia. And behold, another beast, a second, like a bear. It was raised up itself on one side, and it had three ribs in its mouth between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. So the empire that defeated the Babylonians were the Medes and the Persians. They had the reason why the bear raised itself up on one side was because in the beginning the Medes were the dominant ones, but after they had an alliance, the Persians kind of took over and it became the Persian Empire as we know them. And the three ribs in the bear's mouth probably represent the three regions and the biggest cities that they devastated the most: Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt. So yeah, at the end of this empire, the Persians and the Persians became much greater. But there is a whole background story to all of this that's very interesting that I could recommend you study at some point, where Cyrus the he's a Christ figure, and he was prophesied by Isaiah many years before Babylon fell about him becoming a great king, and God using him for the purpose of restoring Israel to to their inheritance by allowing the temple to be built eventually by Artaxerxes. But anyway, I can recommend studying that whole aspect of this story. Then you have the Archimedean Empire, or the Greek Empire, as we call it in prophecy. And the Archimedean Empire was the symbol that we have in Daniel, is a leopard with four wings and four heads. After this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it four wings of a fowl. The beast had also four heads, and dominion was given to it. The four wings show how quickly Alexander the Great conquered and built the Greek Empire. The four heads represent the four parts of the empire that was divided after his death. So yeah, Alexander was a bit of a military genius. He invented new techniques for conquering countries, for transversing big areas with big armies. He was able to cover over 6,000 miles in the Middle East and Asia. He did things that were never done before. Even going into parts of India. I can recommend watching the video on my channel where we go into more detail about these different empires. But the story of Alexander was very interesting. Also, how early he died was very interesting. That he didn't have an heir, and the only way to divide his empire was between his four generals, Lysimachus, Seleucus, Ptolemy, and who's the last one? Seleucus, Lysimachus, Ptolemy, and I can't remember the fourth one. Um, anyway, so it's very interesting how this prophecy was given over 300 years before the Archimedean Empire was divided between his four generals, and uh, it just shows how God knew through his omniscience. He knew how already back then that Alexander the Great, even though he was a great conqueror and he probably had many concubines, that he couldn't produce an heir, and he wouldn't, the Archimedean Empire wouldn't last much longer, and then it would be parted. The known world back then was divided into four parts. Um, anyway, many interesting aspects to the story. I can recommend going into more detail with this part as well. Um, and then we come to the fourth empire, and the the one thing that I wanna stress before we even explain uh, what that empire is. I have asked a lot of people that believe the Bible to be uh, God's word, and the highest authority that they have in their lives for a source of truth, their epistemological foundation for what is true. And I would ask them, okay, so if there are only four great empires, how come is it that the Roman Empire doesn't exist anymore? If the Bible, if Daniel 7 says that this would be the last empire before Christ comes back, why is it that we don't see the Roman Empire exist anymore? Is anybody willing to answer why they think that is?
Well, they're hidden in the shadows.
Yeah. What do you mean by that?
Well, they still do exist, but through the papacy.
So yeah, that's absolutely true. The the Roman Empire never fell. It it just transformed into a church. True. And I don't think people can appreciate how brilliant of a strategy that really is. That you don't have standing armies, that you don't have an emperor who calls himself, the reincarnation of the sun god, and the Pontifex Maximus. Um, staying in the back like that is staying in the shadows, as you call it, is really the more brilliant strategy, because you can be an international institution known for raping children, and you will still be able to endure that and persevere that and be invincible in that way. Go ahead.
It's because everyone wants a connection to God, so they took over that connection. So now they've taken over the world without like having to kill people.
Exactly. And also, I think it has to do with those early centuries, when the Christian church was blossoming and was spreading all over the Middle East and Southern Europe and different parts of that regions. I think Satan could just see that it just didn't work slaughtering them. Like physical persecution would maybe dampen it a bit for a while, and then it would have the opposite effect, that the blood of martyrs would be would make the earth fertile for just new Christian movements to spring out of that. And this is a very important point, that Satan knew he would not be able to make war with the remnant of her seed, of the God's church. He would be much more successful, start countering the making a counter church, or a counter movement, a fake church. So, and they could, this church could dress up as little wizards, and have the hats of the Phoenician gods of Dagons, and they could take the whole Mithraic hierarchy of cardinals and bishops and archbishops, and they could have the Egyptian sun god insignias on their wizard robes with the signs of the sun god, and nobody would think to question it. Why? Because they use the name Jesus. They say the Holy Trinity. They say our Father in heaven. They talk about the Holy Spirit, right? They sometimes will even have some version of the Bible that they will say is something that they care about, even though you weren't allowed to read it for centuries, and you were killed if you even, you know, tried to produce one back then, right? So so this whole point about the Roman Empire being exceedingly strong and more dreadful and terrible than the other beasts, it's really to say that this empire figure out that they had to change strategy. So I think that's the reason why the Fourth Empire is the last one. It's not because the Roman Empire survived its imperial state, its imperial the imperial aspect of it. It's just because I think Satan figured out that, okay, I did it the wrong way. The persecution was too much, too obvious, was too blitzkrieg, full frontal attack. He understood that he had to go back to his older strategies, where he would um, manipulate, and he would spread propaganda in a much more sinister and subtle way. So anyway, I'm gonna read on, and then we're gonna look at some of the symbols and how to interpret them. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold the fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So we know that after the Greek Empire, we had the Roman Empire. We know that when the Roman Empire split into the eastern and western part, where you had the Orthodox or the Greek Orthodox uh, in the east, and then you had um, the Latin western part break up into 10 Western Roman kingdoms. These two parts, west and east, they weren't really good friends. They had disagreements about certain things, and they had power struggles all the time. And um, and it's very interesting what actually united them uh, at a later stage. We're going to look at that in a moment. And the 10 horns, it doesn't specify in verse 7 whether or not the 10 horns is from the eastern or the western, or something, but it becomes obvious once you understand how the imperial Rome transformed into the church, that it's talking about the Latin part of the Roman Empire, the western part, and the 10 kingdoms of the Western Empire. So this terrible beast, it had 10 horns, and we are told several details about one of the 10 horns. I considered the horns, Daniel says, and behold, 3 came up among them, another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. So just like in Daniel 2, where you have the statue and you have the iron legs that represent the Roman Empire, here you have the fourth beast with the 10 horns and with the iron. It's even iron again. The imagery of iron is repeated, and these 10 horns, of course, represents the fragmentation of Western Rome, and these 3 horns that are uprooted, the Heruli, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. Does anyone know how these 3 horns differentiated from the other 7 kingdoms that surrounded them? Does anybody know that detail? Historical fact.
Yes, I think I do. I think they didn't believe in the Trinity. Is that right? Or
That's
not? No.
that's true.
Arians. Yeah.
So they were called Arians
Yeah.
after Alexander Arian. And what the Arians believed is actually quite simple. And I have to stop up here. And how am I doing on time? 35 minutes. This is a very important point, because last time we spoke about the hermeneutic of typology, that we're given a type in prophecy, and then that type is given to us so that we can understand that when the antitype, or the pattern that we are shown in the historic type, repeats in the future as the antitypical fulfillment of the type on a larger scale, you can better understand the different details of the antitype, because the details of the type will be replicated in the antitype. So this was a bit, confusing theory that we had the last time, but now with this example, it's a brilliant example of this. So let me explain why this is such an important detail in chapter 7, and why I chose not to go into the different battles between the Greeks and the Persians and the Babylonians, and why I'm going to spend a good part of my hour here with you people on these three horns. The three horns and the three genocides committed against the Vandals, Ostrogoths, and Heruli, they are informing us about the 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 absolute most important qualification, or the filtering variable that will be differentiating the people, the remnant church, and the rest of the world, the obedient children of God and the disobedient children of God. Because all the world will agree on only one actual thing at the end of the world. They will disagree about 1,000 things, but they will agree about one thing. And the one thing that they will agree on is the thing that the three kingdoms that will uprooted by the Antichrist, by the little horn power, that's the one fact that the whole world is going to agree upon. And that is why the Antichrist system could not be established until every single man, woman, and child that believed, that had the Aryan faith, that I'm going to explain what that is, because there's a lot of disinformation actually about what the Aryans believed. Like if you ask one of the AIs about what did the Aryans believe, they will actually misinform you about what they believed. That tells you something in of itself, how much misinformation there is about the Aryans. The Aryans believed a simple biblical fact, which is that the Son of God is um, is under the authority of his Father. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So a lot of people, like Wikipedia, will tell you that Arianism is all about, um, that Jesus was created, and Jehovah's Witnesses say that he is the first angel of all the angels. All of that is misinformation. That's very important to understand. That you cannot find. I've looked and I looked, and I had friends who are history nerds that they've been looking as well. We've been trying to find actual historical archaeological records that show that Arian actually believed that Jesus was a created being, and you cannot find this. It's weird how little we know about the Ostrogoth culture. We know a little bit about the Vandals. We know that they committed vandalism. That's where we get the word Vandals from. Vandalism comes from the name Vandal, because they would destroy the Catholic idols all over the place. The altars to Isis, and that they today call Mary, Queen of Heaven, or the Babylonian Queen of Heaven, Semiramis, or the Greek version Dionysus, and you could go on and on and on. The Phoenician version, Ashtoreth, and so on. Basically, the pantheistic version of the Trinity. And by the way, if anyone ever asks you, like, if a Trinitarian is ever adamant about saying that the Trinity, nothing predates the Catholic Trinity, there are records of pantheistic trinities that go 4,600 years back. That's some of the oldest history that we have. Like, in general, we don't have much, older artifacts and archaeological findings than that. So anyway, what I wanted to say is that there's a lot of misinformation about Arianism, and it's very important to explain that it's just they believe that the Son was subordinate That's the word, right? Subordinate. That the son is distinct from the father and is subordinate to his father. That's all they believed. And the reason why the Antichrist had to commit 3 genocides in order to establish itself as the political, religious, superpower in the region at that time, in the 5th century, was because they couldn't have people challenging the one doctrine that they would unite the different nations under. Okay, I hope that this point is not lost on you because it's going to be very important once we look at the anti-typical fulfillment of that prophecy, that aspect of the prophecy. And so, I don't know if we're going to read all of this, but I want to ask the more the people who've studied Daniel 7 many times before. Have you ever wondered, and this is not a rhetorical question, I want to hear if anybody of you have ever thought about why you're being told about the different kingdoms, and suddenly from verse 9 to 14, you just have a complete change of scenery and you're taken to like the heavenly sanctuary, and you are told about the different, how the thrones were cast down, the ancients of days sits with his white garment, and so on and so on. Why the sudden change of scenery? Why are we shown that the Son of Man comes with the clouds of heaven and is brought in front of the ancient of days, and so on and so on? Why the sudden change of scenery? Anybody has any idea here why that is? Have you ever wondered why would you suddenly change the topic from the beasts, from the empires, and then change the scenery? Well, okay, so I've been wondering that a couple of years ago when I was making these Bible studies, and I was going through the beasts, and I had all the historical facts in my memory, and I was going through them, and they're like, okay, so let's go to the next verse, and then we'll go to verse 9 and 10. And then I always ask myself, should I get into like the whole throne room scene, or should I just skip it and continue with the different attributes of the fourth beast and the little horn later in the chapter? But only when I understood um, how significant the transference of the dominion aspect of this whole prophecy, how significant that is. First, then could I understand why it's so important to actually have this scene in the heavenly sanctuary. Because once again, if you understand that all of this is the whole book of Daniel, especially chapter 7, but the whole book of Daniel and the whole book of Revelation is all about understanding how Adam lost his dominion over the earth as the father of humanity, and how he's going to gain that back, and how Christ had to win that dominion back for him and then give it back to him when he is resurrected at the first resurrection. And that is why we see how the Ancient of Days sits on his throne with the wheels of burning fire, and so on and so on. And we see that the Son of Man comes with the clouds of heaven, and he was given dominion and glory and kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. It's all about making us understand, okay, so Satan has all these plans, he has these different strategies, these different empires, and he's gonna the amount of deception is only gonna increase the closer we get to the second coming. And there's a crowning act of deception at the end times, that even if it were possible, even the elect are going to believe this great deception, and there's going to be a great falling away that hasn't taken place yet, right? But all of that will finish with Christ receiving the dominion back, and he will give that back to Adam. And for those of you who've read the Great Controversy, a great book that I recommend everybody read, the first thing that happens when we are taken away from this earth to heaven is that we'll see the first Adam meet the second Adam. Jesus is going to have a conversation with Adam about dominion. And that's the whole scene in the last chapter of the Great Controversy is so beautiful when you understand that this is the scepter of power being given back because he forfeited it when he stopped believing the word of God, that he should not eat of the tree of knowledge, that he shouldn't even let his wife wander around in the garden, going alone. Anyway, so we have the little horn, and this little horn is a Western Roman kingdom that commits 3 genocides in order to establish itself as a supreme power that will rule for a long time. I'm not going to read all of that, but let's just look at the summary because I'm running out of time. The little horn rose to power after the fall of Roman Empire and its fracture, right? Oh, it actually says here that it uprooted the Heruli, Vandals, and Ostrogoths, all Aryan nations. That will repeat when we have the type meet the antitype. So in order to have the second Dark Ages, right? And we'll get to that part. You'll have to uproot, or you have to persecute all the anti-typical Aryans. So if you're not an Aryan, and if you just borrow my definition of an Aryan, that you believe that Christ is the literal Son of God, that he is submitted to his Father's authority, and they have one mind, and they are, and it's not all a metaphor, and you cannot just superimpose the pantheistic trinities and just call that Christianity. We don't have the time to go into like how the Council of Nicaea was a big gathering of mostly Gnostic Latin priests, and they basically agreed that they wouldn't abandon their Gnostic pantheistic ideals. So they just said, well, we can just call it for Christian names. And then you had Constantine, who was a sun worshiper, who said, that's a great idea. We will have the venerable day of the sun, where we honor our sun god. We'll just say that that's when we honor Christ, every Sunday. And and a couple of 100 years later, they made a law that if you did not worship the triune God every Sunday, you would become a criminal. You would be a lawless person, and you would open yourself up to persecution. So I think that's the next slide, actually. So it was different from the other horns because it wasn't just a political power, it was a religious power as well. And it persecuted God's people and tried to change God's times and laws. That's verse 25. It says that it will rule for a time, times, and half a time, and that's a bit of a riddle. It's almost like God is inviting you to solve that riddle, but it's already been done 200 years ago. So I can just give you the answer of that one. That we have riddles for our time that are much more interesting to solve nowadays. So we will not spend too much time on that one. So we know that it's a blasphemous power as well, and that and that it established itself when it committed these three genocides. And we know from history that just Emperor Justinian, the Byzantine emperor, he actually made a decree in 533 that that the Latin bishop in Rome should be the head of all churches, and that this bishop would be the new pope, the new emperor, you could say, but just for the church. But he would be able to appoint kings and queens, and he could basically rule over all over the European kingdoms. And in 533, it didn't make much difference to have such a decree, because you still had Theodosius, who was an Ostrogoth king. He he sacked Rome, so doesn't really matter that you've made a decree banning the Arians and all of that when the Arian king was in Rome. But Justinian, he sent his general Belisarius, and they made war with the Ostrogoths, and the Ostrogoths were defeated in 538. And once they were defeated in 538, the Bishop of Rome was established as the head of all churches. And that's when the prophecy of the time and half a time, where this power would persecute God's people, where it would have say pompous words against God and blaspheme God, and it would happen for all that time. And a time in Old Hebrew just meant a year. So times meant 2 years, and half a time means half a year. So you got 3.5 years. So what happened 3.5 years after 538? Nothing happened. They were just establishing themselves as the religio-political power in Europe. So nothing happened after 3.5 years. But we know from other chapters in Daniel that you can think of a day in prophecy. You can think of a prophetic day, as a literal year. And we know that because it works in Daniel 9 with the 70 weeks. And some people say that you could use Ezra 4 and Numbers 14 to say that this is a rule that the Bible gives you. But I don't necessarily like to teach that, because it's not really evident from the text. We just know that sometimes a year is called a day, right? So when Israel was wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, we have in Numbers 14, it says they did that for 40 days. Well, we know it was 40 years, right? So sometimes it's just used invariably. And if you convert the 3.5 prophetic days to 3.5 times 360 literal years, then you come to the number 1260 literal years. And if you add that to 538, from when Belisarius defeated the Ostrogoths in Rome, you come to the year 1798. What happened in 1798? Well, the papacy was shut down by a new power, a secular power under the French Republic by Napoleon. His general Baratier came to Rome and threw out Pope Pius VI. So that's the history of the 1260 years. And of course, humanity knows that period of time as the Dark Ages. So yeah, it wasn't a great time. The persecution was bad, but it's not half as bad as it's going to be in the antitypical fulfillment of this prophecy, which we are told about in Daniel 12, in Daniel 11, in Revelation 12, 11, 13, 17, 18, in Revelation 9. All of these chapters talk about the antitypical fulfillment of this prophecy. Although most of the Christian world would never, I mean, some people on the surface say, yeah, I think this is about the end of the world. But let's say you ask the Theological Institute of the Seventh-day Adventists, they will deny all of that. They will only say, well, there's a small part of Revelation 13 that concerns the end times, but most of it, they say, is all in the past. Let's just talk about the past. Let's talk about history. It's not about the present, near future. So yeah, the Pope gave himself many different blasphemous names. I mean, all of that is very fascinating history. I'm not going to go into it because there's just so much of it that it almost doesn't make sense to even start going through the different blasphemous things that the papacy has done throughout the years. But they, as most of you surely know, they claim to be able to forgive sins. They've changed God's law. They removed the second commandment about not having idols. It is too problematic for them because they have idols everywhere. I don't know if any of you have been to the Vatican, but it's all over the place and in their churches and in their communities. They have changed the Sabbath day. They have made a spurious Sabbath, meaning they claim that the change is that Saturday is not the seventh day is not the Sabbath. It's Sunday, the venerable day of the sun, where they honored their god Jupiter or Saturn, depending on what occult or pantheistic tradition you look at, or Gnostic or Kabbalist. There are different esoteric sources that will tell you who is the deity behind the sun or the venerable day of the sun. So yeah, and they even say on page 10 in their catechism that they have the solemnity to change the day. It's not a word we use a lot, but the solemnity basically means that they are so holy that they have the authority to change the day. So they actually just say it outright. This is, okay, I had a slide about this. So this is the whole thing about how you go from 538 to 1798 with Napoleon's General Berthier. Here you have Ezekiel. Right. So how does this relate?
Apologies, Alex, to interrupt.
Yeah.
Would you mind going back to that slide there of the yes, please, and thank you.
Yep.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's great.
I mean, these graphics, as good as they are, and I have to compliment my wife for finding on the internet, but I can strongly recommend watching my video on Daniel 7, where we have, I mean, professional timelines and all of it. That in like almost 18 minutes, I give you all the details of different battles, how you calculate so I can strongly recommend watching this.
I'll rewatch it tonight. Yeah, thank you.
This goes into detail, like there you go. Okay, so finishing point. How does this relate to our time? As I said 3 times already, when we understand that history is given to us for the sake of us learning about the patterns that will repeat on a larger scale, when the scepter of power is given over to the seventh empire, the seventh head of the beast. I've always calculated the number of heads. You have a beast in Revelation 13, right? For those who don't know, This is the most famous prophecy in the Bible, and it starts, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads. I always told myself that these 7 heads are just the head of the lion, the bear, the 4 heads of the leopard, and the head of the 4th beast. But I no longer believe that. That doesn't actually make sense if you understand that in Revelation 12, we are told that the woman, the church, the woman is a symbol for a church, she's given 2 wings of a great eagle that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she's nourished for a time and a times and half a time from the face of the serpent. And your typical Bible student will say, well, this is just a confirmation that you understood Daniel 7. But I would argue that it's not, that you have in the beginning of chapter 12, you're told what happens in history, the historical part of it. You know, in the very beginning of the chapter, you are told that that there's this persecution happens for 1260 days. And then in the end of the chapter, the number repeats as time times half a time. And people say, oh, well, this is just this is the same prophecy. It just repeats in case you didn't get it, in case you don't understand that this persecution lasts for that amount of time. But there is a hermeneutic of continuity. I don't know if we covered that, but every single chapter has to be read sequentially as chronologically. So if a number repeats, it only repeats because you have an antitypical application of the typical number. So when the type meets antitype, the antitypical Aryans will fly. They will fly into the wilderness. And let me just finish off by saying that this will happen for a time times half a time, but this time, this is no longer symbols. This is not symbolic. When it says that they will free from the face of the serpent, it's not meant symbolically. The serpent will appear to the whole world. And the whole world will worship the serpent. And those who will not worship it, because they don't believe that the serpent is the emanation of the one absolute God, the universal consciousness of the universe, or use some other esoteric terms for it, when the antitypical Aryans will stand up, they will have to be flown into the wilderness and hide for a literal time times half a time for 3.5 years. The end of the world is going to last a bit more than 3.5 years. But we'll cover that in much more detail in part 3, 4, and 5, and 6. The end.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
So is your plan to open up for questions now for a few minutes, or?
Yes. Was it how was the structure of the study? Was it too chaotic?
No, I don't think so.
It got a little bit too detailed in the last 5 minutes.
Okay. Good to know.
You know, when you started talking about your disagreement with other, theologians. It's better when you're just explaining it straight out.
Right.
I think
Well,
so.
I find it's important to emphasize the point that you have to read the chapters chronologically. You cannot say that the 14th verse in any given chapter is a repetition of the third verse. This is this violates not only logic and the requirement of having a consistency of sequential, execution of the historical events. It also completely breaches, the contextual hermeneutic that we learned last time. That's why I wanted to emphasize the point that even though most prophecy experts will say all of that is in the past, I'm saying it goes against these hermeneutics that we've learned about.
Okay.
I have another question, maybe to make things even more confusing, but I'd like to hear your take on that, because I listened to Ken LeBrun about Daniel and came across something a couple of weeks ago that was very new to me. And it's actually in Daniel 12:11, I think. And he claims that the defeat of the Aryans is actually in prophecy, in that it says there shall be 1,290 days until the abomination of desolation is set up, and that coincides with 508, not 538, which would be 1,260 days from as a starting point to. You following? I think I'm
Yes.
a little bit confused. Yeah. And so that was the year in 508, that was the year when Clovis actually defeated the Arians. That's what he says. That's what Ken LeBrun says. And
Yeah.
it's startling that this date should also be as a second starting point for the setup of the papacy. And
Yeah. So
what's your take on that?
so it's wrong on several levels. And I have many friends who believe this as well.
Mhm.
And what I typically say to them is this: first of all, 508 AD is not a prophetic date. Nothing happened in 508. The only thing that happened was that Clovis became the consul of Rome, and he started his campaigns against the Visigoths, where he started slaughtering Arians. And that's very relevant for understanding the controversy between the Arians and the Catholics. But as a prophetic date, nothing happened. Nothing happened in 508. So the way people arrived at 508 is by looking at Daniel 12 and having a confirmation bias where they want to put it in the past, even though the whole chapter is obviously in the future. And why do I say obviously? Well, first of all, it says so several times. The amount of times it says, and at the time of the end, it says so several times in the chapter. People just tend to ignore that. And I asked so many of my friends who are theologians, I said, how can you justify the time of the end being the time of the end? I mean, you can be even flexible with your interpretation and say that's 1798, which is like the most conservative take on when the time of the end started. It's after the 1260 prophetic days, when Barthier pushed out Pope Pius and pushed him into exile. And even at that time, you're still over a millennia away from 508. So that's point number one. That's point number three. Point number four is that the structure, the contextual hermeneutic does not allow you to put it in the past. What do I mean by that? Well, the numbering of the chapters is not, doesn't come from Daniel. Daniel didn't number the chapters. He just had a continuous text.
Mhm. Mhm.
It was done with the translation of the King James Bible, and you can see that the whole chapter starts with the word and Michael shall stand up. So it's a continuous thing that happens. So there's a cause and effect. So Michael stands up. That's the effect of the cause that precedes it. And what's the cause? It's that the king of the north shall plant the tabernacle of his palace in between the seas in the holy mountain, and there shall be war, and none shall come to help him. Right? That is all in the future, and nobody's even denying that. No, I've never heard anybody put that in the future. So if verse 45 in chapter 11 is in the future, and you have the hermeneutic of continuity, meaning and Michael shall stand up as an effect of the cause of verse 45, and then it just follows sequentially, and at the time of the end you shall this and this and this and that, and then you arrive at the 11th verse with the daily being taken away and the abomination that causes desolation, which is the anti-typical fulfillment of the chapter. You're talking about our next study,
Mhm.
but you cannot put it in the past. Why? Because you throw out all of the hermeneutics that we talked about. The contextual hermeneutic, the hermeneutic and by the way, 508, how were the even if you take 508, the Ostrogoths weren't defeated, the Heruli weren't defeated. So I can't see how the three horns were uprooted at that time. It's just they're super fitting their model, their confirmation bias by
Mhm.
just taking the 1798 and just subtracting 1290. And that's how I read 508 came up. That
Yeah,
they
it comes from that's what I was going to ask, what you make of that, figure of 1,290 days then. Where does it take you?
yeah, so
Is it of no significance then in that
it's
context?
it's it's if you apply it to the past, it's you have to throw out all the hermeneutics. That's my point. So you cannot take 1290, make them symbolic, by the way, and say those are not literal days. What gives you the right to make that
Mm.
literal days, by the way? Because in chapter 7, everything is wrapped in symbols.
Mhm. Mhm.
Where are your symbols in chapter 12? You have
Mhm.
them. The abomination of desolation is not a symbol. The daily is not a symbol. It's a very enigmatic term, but it's not a symbol. So the only way you arrive at 508 is by doing what William Miller did, and I have a huge amount of respect for William Miller, but what William Miller did was he took 1798, he had his confirmation bias, and he said, if you just subtract 1290, something will come out of it. And then he found a history book, he found out that Clovis was made the consul of Rome, and he said, there you go, paganism was taken away. That's your daily that is taken away, and
Mhm.
that is just that is just not.
Confounding everything.
You throw out every single hermeneutic to be able to make that claim, and I cannot. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's
Got
but
you. Yeah.
that just to finish this point, 1290, that prophecy, it's the most important prophecy for our time.
Okay. next
There is
time.
there is no prophecy that's more important than that one.
Mhm,
When the daily has been taken away,
mhm,
you will have the persecution of the anti-typical Arians.
mhm.
That is,
As literal days.
those are literal days, yes.
Mhm. Thank you for the clarification.
Sorry for the rant. I was just,
No, 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 I wanted to know because I couldn't wrap my head around it, so.
yeah, Daniel 12 is very interesting to study. Yeah, Rich?
Hey, brother. How are you?
Hey, Rich.
Yeah, I had a comment here on what you were talking about with Daniel 12:1 and verse 45, how the events of verse 45 are leading up to the climax, basically, when Michael stands up. So there's retroaction that is happening within that verse. It's a retroactive principle, is how I refer to it, but you could look at it as retrospective as well. But where a prophetic text announces the climax or final event first, and then retroactively reaches backward to summarize or explain or illuminate earlier developments that were already underway before the climax occurred. So there's this pre-configuration of events that have to happen, a preparation of the actors that have to take place to play their part in the final scene. So the stage has to be built, the actors have to take their places on the stage, then the curtain is raised, then you have the final event. But that's what I've been looking at very closely, and I see that in Revelation 11:18 as well, with the first two events there. They're not listed in order, in chronological order, but it mentions the angry nations, then thy wrath is come, and the time to judge the dead. And we're told in Spirit of Prophecy that those two events, the time to judge the dead and the angry nations, had already begun in Ellen White's time. And that's what I would call the time of trouble that's leading up to the time of trouble, which occurs after the close of probation. It's in retrospect. The time of Jacob's trouble, actually having the events being aligned before that are necessary in order to bring about the very last time of Jacob's trouble, if that makes sense.
I mean, that's, I don't know if the word obvious is correct one, but of course you need, it's an escalation, right? It's a gradual escalation. You know, the time of trouble doesn't just like, oh, okay.
Exactly.
It's the
Yes.
10th of August. Now we have the time of trouble. Welcome. Of course,
Right.
there's a gradual escalation, but it all comes down to how you define the different terms, right? So how do you define the time of trouble? And if we just define it by, and this is a huge topic, right? This would take hours to get to the bottom of, but if you just define it as exactly as the verse does it, the first verse in the chapter, in chapter 12, that it's a time of trouble that has not been ever since there was a nation. Okay, so um, I mean, you had all kinds of genocides, right? You've had millions of people being slaughtered, concentration camps. You've had, just the amount of horror that we read about in the history, bloodstained history papers. But it's going to be much worse than that. And speaking of Ellen White, I don't know how open we are to just using her writings as authoritative, but she's quite specific about the fact that the time of Jacob's trouble, and what was the Jacob's trouble? It was that his brother Esau wanted him dead, right? So when is the time when the anti-typical Aryans, when the world wants to see them dead? When is that?
Second plague, according to great controversy, from what I understand, sometime around the second plague, the death decree, right?
Yeah, I actually placed that much later.
Yeah, I have a friend who's he's got a good argument too. So around the fifth plague, but either way you look at it, it's after the close of probation.
Well, that's a whole conversation, yeah. But anyway, it's late in the game and not in 1922 and onwards.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's for sure. But it's the groundwork is being laid. It's being
Yes.
set right
Yeah.
now.
So one thing, if I can throw you a bone, Rich, the thing that has to happen in order for having a universal Sunday law, where you have laws of counterfeit worship. Before you have that, you have to have an international community that's so tightly knit that they can just all agree that these are the correct laws. And I know that now that we have lived through the 2020s, none of us need the imagination to imagine how that will go down. We can just remember it from a couple of years ago. And I don't know how defined you guys were, but I never wanted to go with a mask, and that was tricky. Like I was I was not easy to I lived in Spain at that time, and we weren't even allowed to get out of the house in April of 2020. So
Mm.
March of 2020. So anyway, my point is that in order to have a new world order, or Novo Ordo Seclorum, as it says in the $1 bill, a new order for the ages, you have to have an international community, and all of that started to consolidate, and all of these conglomerates started to all of these alliances started forming after World War One, just like you say in your
The
documentary.
League of Nations.
The League of Nations turned to the United
Yeah.
Nations, and
Mhm.
even all the intelligence communities started popping up. The OSS became the CIA, and so on and so on and so on. And I agree with all of that. The World Council of Churches right after World War II, the Bank of International Settlements after World War II, World Bank, IMF, International Monetary Fund, and so on and so on. But the trigger of all of these things, to go back to what Andrea said, is the taking away of the daily that makes it possible for the abomination of desolation to be set up. But this is the future study. We're going into the future study now.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I have a really good paper here on what I was trying to describe as this retrospective principle, and it's from an Advent or a Review and Herald article from 1909 by Percy McGann. And if I can, I'll put it in the chat before we close up. But it is really something. I just came across it recently. A friend shared it with me and describes it so well. How all of these events, the events happening within the sixth plague, the three spirits like frogs, they go out, and this time of preparation takes years. It takes years and years to bring all of these entities or agencies together in this unity, this confederation. But anyway, I'll pass the mic, and I'll try to put that in the chat, and if I can, I sent you an email before, but I don't know if you've gotten it to the Z. What's your email again?
I'll send it in the chat, but I haven't
Yeah.
received anything from you.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering because I sent that probably a week ago.
Jenny,
So I'm just going to say, Rich, you're going to put that paper up, and you're going to put up your email. So in case there's a different one more question, then maybe we should close up on a different topic or
Yeah, I got 5 minutes left.
yeah. So if there's one more question from anyone or comment. No, no, that's fine. So thank you, Alex.
You're
Yeah.
very welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Let's
Alex.
close with, let's maybe close with prayer. Maybe I'll pray. Is that
Yes.
okay? Yeah. So, dear Father in heaven, thank you so much for our study this evening, and thank you for this amount of information and knowledge that's there. And help us, Father, as we navigate this information, and help us to just pursue what is going to be true and right, and is going to help us basically get through the rest of our lives. And thank you for your prophecies, and thank you for your word. And bless every head bowed and every family represented, Father. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Also, I want to recommend Uriah Smith's book on Daniel and Revelation. It's you can find it for free online on this link. And the reason why I recommend it is because all the very crispy historical facts that I skipped today for time restrictive reasons, you can just knock yourself out with that book. He spends pages and pages on the different wars, on the different generals, and why did what, and their different campaigns. And it's if you're into history, it's very, very interesting. The one caveat I would add though is that he viewed Daniel and Revelation through the prism of his time. He interpreted many of the chapters through what was happening in the 1800s. So he got a lot of things wrong. And that's, a very provocative thing to say for people who are into heterodoxy, but one of the hermeneutics we covered last time was that God often gives light to the generation that actually needs, to go out and preach it. Like he times the light to be given to the generation that needs it. So their generation just could not absorb the truths that are for our time with Revelation 17 and Revelation 9 and Revelation 11. So I just wanted to add that it's a blessing to read Erasmus' book, and especially when it comes to chapter 7, because chapter 7 is a historical, it's a timeline from history. But when it comes to these other chapters, I would not take it as gospel.
Yeah, there's a quote I just put up from James White in the chat. He basically presents here these other evangelical writings and prophetic interpretations, how they're attempting to basically give all the details of a prophecy before it happens. And what he's saying here is that's not possible until it's happened. When the event has taken place, then you can look back and you can know all the details of the prophecy.
Yep.
Yeah, really good quote, though.
Yeah. So in other words, we always understand prophecy retrospectively.
Right. And
I think that's how I grew up as an Adventist. I was always told you understand it retrospectively. So this is so new to me in a way.
Mhm. Yeah, so
we're
sorry, go ahead.
sorry. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's so tempting to just like we have such a complete and detailed list of the sequence of events that are going to happen in the future within Adventism before they've happened. So we've kind of fallen into this same trap that James White is talking about here in this quote.
Mhm.
We think we have it all figured out when and looking for these things to be future when they've already happened in the past.
Right.
A lot of them.
Yeah, I would actually go the other way around.
That
I-
what?
well, maybe a bit the wrong tone to finish on, but if you take the diametrically opposed view of what you just said, that in my personal opinion, that's a more correct view, that most of Adventist interpretation of prophecy, it's all about putting things in the past, and it's the Ottomans, it's the Saradins, it's the it's all in the past, right? And the theologians in the institutes are very comfortable with this because it does not make you think about your life and your future and the near future. And just to finish my thought here very quickly, um, of course, I think it goes without saying what makes most sense, that God gives the last generation with the most access to the Bible, with the best communication devices and the best abilities to spread information like never before, with artificial intelligence and 8K resolution cameras and so on, or to put, all prophecies about the 1200 crusades against the Saradins in the Middle East, where the bottomless pit is some desert that nobody knows about, and just be comfortable with those historical facts. Nothing to see here. The star that falls from heaven and the 200 million locusts that torment humanity for 5 months. All those are the very dangerous, Mohammedan soldiers. They were,
Right.
very dangerous.
And that's still future in some views. But yeah, I don't disagree with you there. I mean, it's just what I'm saying is that we can't know the details in their entirety before
Right.
it occurs. And that's what there are many of us among us that are doing that, attempting to do that. So that's the danger.
And of course, I can't resist saying this verse. Nobody knows the day or the hour.
right,
Sorry,
right.
I just couldn't resist it.
Actually, that's a mistranslation of that verse.
Oh,
The,
hey,
the right translation is nobody maketh known the day or the hour
That's
okay.
right. It was except the Father.
except the Father. And why is that? Is because when we hear when the wicked hear the thunder, the children of God receive the blessing. They receive the day or the hour because only the Father maketh known. That's the blessing of
Amen.
the 1335 days of Daniel 12. But that's for a different time. So it's a
Wow.
mistranslation. And besides, it's the go-to argument that
Yeah.
the Trinitarians have actually. Now, I should go now, but that's just my last point. The favorite Trinitarian argument, one of the favorite Trinitarian arguments is see, not even not even Jesus knows the day and the hour. And then the anti-Trinitarians will go, well, if he's God, how does he then not know it? Isn't he omniscient? Like, God is omniscient, right? How can God not know the day or the hour? And then the Trinitarian will argue against that. And that's a whole talking point in the debates between the Trinitarians and non-Trinitarians, that the Son doesn't know the day of the hour. But it's just a mistranslation.
Okay, thank you. Right. So look, I guess I know some of you could probably ramble and think and stay on for longer, but I thank you so much, and it's probably time to close up. Yeah.
Yes, I gotta go. Ciao.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Happy
Thank you
Sabbath.
very much.
You too.
Thanks.
Take
Good to
it
see you,
easy.
Ross.
See you, Rich. Have a good one.
You too. God bless you guys.
See you, Jenny.
Bye, guys. See you.
Bye.
Bye.